Hey guys, Cam here from PhoneDog.com, and whenever a manufacturer has to try and decide which compromises to make when creating a mid-range or a budget phone, there are always some things that are a little bit lacking. And so when I got hold of the Sony Xperia M2, I wanted to see exactly what was lacking, what performed well, and so we're going to bring you our full review after using this for about 7 to 8 days. But before we do that, I have to thank our friends at Best Buy Mobile who often supply us with free phones to give away at our One Port Bandit giveaway. I'll leave a link to that in the description box so that you can go spin to win and see if you can grab yourselves a handset for nothing. But onwards to the review. The Sony Xperia M2 will look very familiar to most of you because it looks like most of the other Xperia devices. It's a flat, squarish device. It's thin with slightly rounded corners, and it's got these sort of trademark bands along the edges. Slightly rounded just at the top and the bottom of the edges, but what's different between this and, let's say, the prime Xperia Z2 is that it's made mostly out of plastic. There's not much metal in there. At least there's no metal externally. It's not waterproof and it's not dustproof. But it does feel very solid in hand. It's fairly comfortable to hold. It's nice and light. And it does have glass front and back, and it's scratch resistant, so it does try and help avoid damage in that way. And it also has these trademark buttons on the right hand edge. The power button is about halfway up, while the volume rocker is just below that, and the dedicated camera shutter button is just on the bottom edge. So you turn your camera around, press and hold the shutter button, and you launch your camera app and you can take photos. Also on the right hand edge is the flap that covers the micro SD and micro SIM card slots. And that's pretty much all you get on this phone in terms of buttons and ports, except the micro USB port on the left hand edge, obviously used for charging your phone. What I like about this is, unlike some of the older Xperia devices, it doesn't have any of that horrible rubberized textured material around the edges, so it's not a dust magnet. But what I will say is the glass front and back is a little bit of a fingerprint magnet. I lost count of the number of times that I had to wipe this on my shirt just to get the grime of my fingerprints off the screen. And that brings us quite nicely onto the display. It's 4.8 inches, which means it's not one of the smallest on the market. It's quite a good size, but it's at the resolution where you may feel a little bit shortchanged. It's 540 by 960 resolution, which gives it a pixel density of just 229 pixels per inch. And while that's not miles away from the supposedly magic 300 ppi number, it's still noticeably less sharp than most other displays on the market, including the 720p display found on the cheaper Moto G. And it's not just the resolution that lets it down, the viewing angles aren't tremendous either. If you're looking at a white screen or a web browser, often you turn it and you find that the white sometimes goes a little bit beigey or yellow. But it's not terrible. It's certainly not the worst display in terms of viewing angles I've ever seen, and it can get quite bright. What I will say is that if you're holding it at a decent length away from your face, it does still seem quite sharp when you're playing games, watching videos. You certainly don't feel like it's an awful experience, but you do feel like it could be a heck of a lot better. On the back we have an 8 megapixel camera, which is capable of shooting 1080p video. Now, what I will say about this is, again, it's not the worst camera I've used, and it's certainly not the best. Using it outside to test it for taking photos and footage, what I did find was that although I could get good results, it wasn't a guaranteed every time thing. Autofocus seemed to do what it wanted a lot of the time, especially if my subject was quite close up. But it does have a lot of fun features as well. Like the Z2, you can install features like the panorama or augmented reality effect. You also have time burst photos where you can take a burst of photographs, choose your best one. So it does have a lot of features in there, and actually the resolution and the sharpness is quite good. When I did get good results, they were really, really good. But again, the display kind of lets it down here, because what you see on screen isn't exactly the same as what you're going to see when you take that photograph and put it onto your computer or show it on a higher resolution screen, because the actual end result and the end photograph is actually rather good. You do get some graining, especially in the darker areas, but it does seem to do quite a good job of picking up colours even when there's low light. Now on to the loudspeaker and the sound performance. Unlike the Z2, it doesn't have stereo front-facing speakers. Instead, you'll notice on the bottom edge it has a really nice looking grille, and that covers the microphone and the single loudspeaker. Now the loudspeaker itself is loud. It actually surprised me the first time I used it how loud it was, and so I tested it to play music and video, gaming, and actually it does get quite a good volume, but it isn't very well balanced. But then that's not surprising. It's one speaker in one phone, and it's a mid-range phone. You will hear your notifications going off, and I guess that's the key thing. If you're expecting audiophile levels of quality and tonal depth, then you're not going to get those, but then there aren't many phones out there that will give you that anyway. Performance was pretty surprising. It's got a Snapdragon 400 series processor in there, and it does seem to make light work of most of what I threw at it. It's running Jelly Bean, not Android KitKat, but it does seem to handle it rather well, transitioning between apps and loading up apps and switching between them, web browsing. It generally handled them okay. There was some lag here and there, but then it's no real difference to the lag I experienced on some higher end phones. So really, it does make the best use of the mid-range processor that's inside it, and it does give you good performance. And the battery as well, it's 2300 mAh, which actually does quite well. Because of the screen resolution, it doesn't need as much power to run that display or give it as much light, and so you do get a good day and a half on regular use, or at least in my regular use. In experience, even sometimes would get better battery life than what's on my HTC One M8. So it really isn't terrible, and it's certainly better than the battery life I would get from my iPhone. So what we have in the end is a phone that looks and feels premium. It's solid, it's well made, but there is a compromise, and I can't help but wonder if they made the wrong one. Putting a lower specification display on a phone in this day and age is quite a risky move, because everything that we do is on the screen. It has to be clear, it has to be crisp and sharp with good levels of contrast and colour, and this doesn't really deliver. Although most other aspects of the phone perform really well, to me personally I think the display, cheapening on the display is kind of the wrong place to start. If it was me, I would have rather opted for a Moto G style move where I put a 720p display on there to make sure that it's sharp and crisp, and then used cheaper materials and a cheaper build quality on the rest of the phone so that I still got a really good experience of using the phone, because as it stands, this is quite a lot more expensive than a Moto G. So all in all, not a terrible phone. In most aspects it performs really well, and you're certainly getting what you pay for. I'm Cam, I'm at PhoneDog_Cam on Twitter, and I will see you again soon.